Okay, hello chess players. Today we're going to be doing my follow-up video to my first video on Keres Refutes the Accelerated Dragon. The positions we're discussing are e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, cd4, knight d4, g6 begins the Accelerated Dragon, and then we have knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, and then of course the super question mark move that leads to immediate slight edge black, the move pawn to f3, or at least that's what all the commentators give. That's what all the books give. That's what all the videos on this opening give. They give f3 question mark slight edge black, and of course our analysis begins here. Anyways, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So I got a bunch of comments on my first video, and of course I didn't have time to cover absolutely all of my preparation in my first video, which is why I have to do the second video. So I'm going to try to cover everybody's concerns from the first video and cover all the lines, and rest assured that I would not have published the video if I did not feel that every single variation eventually does lead to slight edge white. I wouldn't have said that, Keres refutes the Accelerated Dragon if it wasn't at least slight edge white, and not what every single book gives and every single other video gives, which is slight edge black. So anyways, the immediate d5, which I didn't really elaborate on very much in the first video, I just said d5 loses a pawn, and then I left it at that. It does lose a pawn, by the way. You don't take the pawn, you play bishop b5. It was an obvious tactic to me, and I didn't mention it in the video, but I forgot that it's not an obvious tactic to everybody. Bishop b5 pins the knight to the king, and then after bishop d7, we simply capture the pawn. And then, of course, we can hold it if we have to with knight e2. There's no way for black to recoup that pawn long term. So it is a whole pawn, and white's going to be able to keep it. Everything is fine. So that is an extra pawn, and that's how you keep it. You can check that on your engines at home if you want. Now, most books and most commentators are aware of this, so they give the move castles kingside. And this is another reason I think most books and most videos are being a little disingenuous when they say f3 question mark slight edge black, because knight b3, even right here, is just slight edge white. And Magnus Carlsen has played this position before with the white pieces. It's slight edge white all day long. Knight b3 prevents d5 mechanically, so you can just play that. But anyways, the Keres line is the move I recommended in the video, which goes bishop c4, and then after queen b6, which every book gives us an exclamation mark, and then they give slight edge black again. But you can play this move. You can play pawn to a3, which Keres introduced all the way back in the 1960s. So this move is very, very old, like over 50 years old, probably close to 60 years old at this point. Yeah, way more than 50. 1960s. I gotta date myself here. So I guess 60, over 60 years old. Wow. Okay, so this move is very, very old, well over a half a century old. But a3, the idea is all of the tactical stuff doesn't work anymore. Like the normal queen to b2 isn't going to work because knight a4 traps the queen. The normal knight takes e4 doesn't work because now we have this idea knight d5, and then the normal queen a5 won't work because we have b4 hitting the queen, and then when the queen retreats we take the knight and rip a knight, and we are in fact better. So the normal stuff doesn't work. Now I elaborated on some of the alternative tries in the previous video. Like I elaborated on queen c5 and I gave preparation for that. But what I didn't elaborate on were some of the best tries that black can try right here. Mainly the two things that black can try are e6 or some idea involving knight to g4. Those are basically the best ideas. Now, what's interesting is the immediate knight g4 isn't all that great, so I'll just kind of cover that right now. Is you can play f takes g4, and then let's say knight d4, we still gain this tempo with knight d5. And as it turns out, gaining this tempo against the queen actually matters, because what the engine gives is after queen c5, it gives something like c3 and then say queen c4, bishop d4, queen d4, queen d4, c captures d4, even just d6, knight e7, king here, takes, king d2, major advantage white. But some variation like that seems to happen in all lines. That extra tempo that you gain with the move knight d5 before all the exchanges happens seems to favor white, no matter what combination they decide to exchange the pieces in. So like after, let's say bishop d4, another possibility, you can go down this route. You can also have like knight d4, queen d3, b5. The book, it just gives castles queenside as decisive advantage white as well. So regardless of the move order, this seems to work out for white, is just decisive advantage. Gaining that tempo with knight d5 is really critical. So naturally, if you're going to play the knight g4 idea, what you should play is the move queen c5 first. I actually had Nate Graham years and years ago, before we had really good engines, he tried this against me. He's a master, very strong player. He was, one of my heroes when I was growing up. He was like one of the few senior masters in the state of Minnesota. There was him and Leonard Johnson and a couple other guys, but like, I would follow all the games of the guys that were over 2,400, and Nate Graham was one of them. So it was fun when I got to play this idea against Nate Graham because, of course, I knew Nate Graham was a very good player. So he played Queen C5 against me, and I got to whip out all of my preparation at the time. And the preparation that I had back then surprisingly holds up even now. It even holds up against modern engines, which I'm kind of shocked by. So I'll kind of share all that preparation with you, but it went very, very deep. It's knight g4, f g4, bishop d4, bishop d4, and then he thought, queen d4, queen d4, knight d4, castles queenside, knight back here. And now I just did something very simple. I played g5, d6, h4. Now, what's interesting is if you put this position on an engine, even a modern engine, even like Stockfish and NNU, even if you put it like on the cloud, it gives slight edge black, like very slight edge black. It'll give like either equality or it'll give very slight edge black. And it's interesting because like even if you show this position to people, like I see a lot of people assess this position, and in my mind actually assess this position incorrectly as slight edge black. And what they're looking at is they're looking at the pawn structure. They're saying, okay, there's a good pawn structure here for black, and I have this permanent outpost on e5. I'm going to have an outpost on e5, and look, I have a square on g4, and I've got two really good squares. And when I look at this position, I assess this position as slight edge white. So like, what's the difference? Like, why is my assessment different? Am I just being unobjective, or how am I assessing this position differently? And why do I think I'm right? Well, for starters, I think I'm right. I've played this position many, many times, and I've won many, many games with it. So that's number one. So there's the results. But number two, there's a different way to assess a position than how computers are assessing the position, or from a purely positional way of assessing the position, where you just look at the pawn structure and you look at the material and you say, one side is better because look, his pawn structure is perfect and the material is the same. And that's by looking at plans. And this was something that Capablanca said when he was talking about his game against Aaron Nimzovich. And it was, I think, one of the most important things I ever learned about chess was, you know, everybody looks at a position and they say, one side is better. And they'll point to like one move that somebody could have done differently or another move that somebody could have done differently. But chess isn't played this way. Chess is played in a series of moves that we refer to as plans. And here's the thing. Black doesn't have any here. Okay, fine. You put your knight on e5 and you put your bishop on g4. Then what? What are you going to do next? For starters, as soon as I plant my knight on d5, it's not even clear what you do next after that, because it's not so simple to maneuver your knight to e5 when your e7 pawn is hanging. You also can't play a move like e6 or e5 without further weakening your dark squares. White also has a plan eventually to play h5 and h captures g6. You also can't play e6 or e5 without hanging your pawn on d6. Meanwhile, White has a clear plan to improve his position for like the next, 10, 15, 20 moves. And this was something that Dorfman pointed out. He was Garry Kasparov's trainer. Is you can easily figure out who has a static advantage by figuring out who can improve their position indefinitely. So here, yeah, like on a very short-term positional sense, Black is a little bit better, like right now. But Black isn't actually a little bit better. Probably White is a little bit better in this position because White can improve his position indefinitely. In this position, just no matter what Black does, we can come up with any number of Black moves. White's going to play knight d5. White can improve his position by eventually playing pawn to b4, king b2, pawn to c4, and can advance his queenside pawns, eventually obtaining a passed queenside pawn. And whenever I plug this position into the engines, and I'll just play like, I'll blunder check and I'll play my best moves, basically going down the path of my plan, like possibly playing h5 and opening the h file, but for the most part following the plan of playing b4, king b2, c4, b5, etc., and eventually obtaining a passed pawn on the queen side. When I get to like 10 or 12 moves into this plan, the computer will change its assessment and say that White has an advantage once the pawns get far enough up the board that it realizes that the passed pawns on the queen side are an advantage. But basically, this 3-2 majority should be an advantage in the end game once I get there. So like knight d5, b4, king b2, c4, b5, etc. This position should actually be slight edge White, which leads me back to the best move that Black can play here, which is the move pawn to e6, which all the commentators give as best as they give this move pawn to e6. And I mean, they're not wrong. It is a really good move. The idea is to keep the move knight d5 under wraps. You don't want to lose that tempo. So my initial thoughts with a move like e6 was, why not play this trappy move knight a4? And then after queen a5, I can kind of trap the queen. Like I can play b4, and if they play this queen takes a4 question mark, bishop b5 traps the queen. Well, because with best play, they're not necessarily going to fall for that. And now my old computers used to give this bad line. They used to give this move queen d8, and then of course, white's doing great here. White can just like castle, d5 takes, bishop d3, and white hasn't lost any material, and black has weaknesses on the dark squares. Black also has trouble developing this light squared bishop, and even the computer says this is slight edge white. So everything seems to fall into place for slight edge white if they retreat. But of course, they have this excellent move. They can play the move queen e5, and this position should be slight edge black, and I agree with that assessment. Queen e5 holds together all the dark squares. The best white has is probably to sacrifice some material and play for activity. Something like maybe pawn to c3, d5, and then try something like either knight c6 or possibly even something crazy like bishop e2 takes castles, and then just play for activity this way, and just give up the material and try to play for activity. But I think maybe even black's just a little bit better in some of these positions. I don't trust the positions after queen e5. So what should we do instead? Well, we should definitely play the move instead of knight a4. We should definitely play the move castles kingside. And then most of the books and most of the engines and most of the videos and most everything on the planet gives the move knight takes e4. And then they'll of course give like equality or slight edge black, or they'll say it's equal, but white has compensation. And I, of course, disagree with all these assessments because, again, the assessments from that previous example are very similar to the positions that I see coming out of this. So I go all the way back to that game that I played, pre-engines, pre-everything else, where I was assessing the position as slight edge white, whereas everybody else was assessing the position as slight edge black or equality. And I mean, okay, and here's another thing to keep in mind. You might think, oh, well, Rob, you're not being objective. You should follow the computer assessment to the letter. These assessments are only different by a couple tenths of a pawn, to be honest. Even my position that I, had against Nate Graham, I was saying slight edge white. The computers were giving slight edge black. So basically, I'm assessing it at 0.3 in favor of white. The engines are giving 0.1 in favor of black. So, we're off by a couple tenths of a point. So as a chess master who's been a master for over 20 years, I think I'm allowed to have a little bit of an opinion. I think I'm allowed to have a tenth of a pawn. I think I can do that, especially considering engines will disagree with each other oftentimes by more than a tenth of a pawn. But again, it comes back to plans. Okay, so we have knight takes e4. Now the idea is knight a4. So again, basically castles is just to delay the knight a4 idea. We have queen a4, and then we have f takes e4, queen takes a4, b4, making the same threat. So you still get the same cheap shot. But in this case, this threat forces them to exchange off the dark squared bishop. Knight d4, bishop d4, and they have to exchange the dark squared bishop, and that means that black is going to have weaknesses on the dark squares. Keep in mind, black didn't have a choice. He had to exchange off that dark squared bishop or lose his queen. So here we're going to have bishop back to c6, bishop g7, king g7, queen d4, protects the bishop, attacks the dark squares. So I look at this position, and I say slight edge white. The computer looks at this position, and it gives an assessment like really close to equal. It's like something like if you put this on Stockfish 17 and let it run, it gives like 0.0, like maybe 1 or something in favor of black. It likes black a little bit. But it gives something very close to equality. It is slight edge white. Black has no clear way of finishing his development, and black has weak dark squares. And he has no way to clearly fix all those problems. Meanwhile, white does have a clear plan for the future. So, for example, the computer gives immediate slight edge to major advantage white if black simply retreats, which shows you how dicey this position is. This keeps all the dark squares weak, and now he has no way of collecting himself. He can't play f6, e5. White can simply have an advantage after h4, and the computer backs that up. If you look at this on Stockfish NNU, it backs up slight edge to major advantage white after simply h4, with the idea of h5, etc. So what black has to do, what the engine gives, is the immediate pawn to f6, with one of the ideas being to block up all the dark squares with f6 and e5. And this is the normal remedy when you have weak dark squares. You want to start placing all of your pawns on dark squares, especially considering that you have a light squared bishop remaining. So this is the right defensive strategy given by the computer. But there is this weird threat here. There's this threat of bringing this rook to f6, and then after the recapture, to bring the other rook to f1. And in certain situations, white can get away with this, and that means that black has to be a little bit leery of this idea. So, for example, After we just continue normally with, say, rook a d1, and then we have b5, we can play bishop e2, and we can offer them this pawn on c2, which they can't take according to the engine. If queen takes c2, we have this immediate idea of rook f6, rook f6, rook f1, and the engine gives this as advantage white. It actually gives slight edge white. So what should black do instead? Well, black should obviously continue covering his dark squares. Black should play e5. So one of the things that people are going to look at when they see this video is they're going to say, well, black is up a pawn. Shouldn't he be exchanging material and just win the endgame? And if you think that black's position is slightly better, that might be where your mind is going to go. You're going to say, I should just exchange and play the endgame. If you play queen b6 here, your position is significantly worse after queen b6, rook f3. Rook f3 holds the pawn on a3, but also now the pawn on b5 and the pawn on d7 are hanging, and it's still not clear how you finish developing your position. White has a lot of activity here. White has more than enough activity to compensate for a pawn, and in this situation, white is just simply getting his pawn back. So the engine actually just gives slight edge white here, and I have to absolutely 100% agree with that. This is just slight edge white. So you can't even exchange queens in this position to make your position a little bit more like palatable, so to speak. So queen b6 is no good. Queen c2 is no good. You have to play e5. And after you play e5, white can, of course, exchange queens. Because as previously discussed, exchanging queens doesn't change the long-term nature of the position. The long-term nature of the position is white has a plan. Black doesn't. That's kind of a problem. And the computer doesn't really see that until way down the road. You can play queen d5, rook d5, bishop b7, rook takes d7, rook f7, and these are all computer lines. So bishop e4, bishop takes b5, bishop takes c2, takes, and then rook d7. And finally here, the computer just gives dead equality. It stops thinking that black has any advantage whatsoever. It actually gives like very, very slight edge white. It's like 0.01 in favor of white. But here it finally starts realizing that, this queen side pawn duo versus this pawn right here, and the fact that I'm more active and have the rook on the 7th are a bigger deal than being down a pawn. Even in this, completely stripped down position where we've gotten down to pretty much an endgame scenario where it just looks like, okay, black has an extra pawn. What are you going to do? Black has to give that pawn back immediately. Black has to play the move king e6, which is why the computer finally starts realizing that white's doing okay here. Black has to play king e6 and give this pawn back right away, and then the engine just kind of gives equality here. It is slightly better for white, though. White has the 2 pawns versus the 1 over here, and that's going to be more dangerous than black's pawns in this particular position. But, I mean, if everything is played correctly, this should be, a draw. I mean, it should just be equal, but still, I would keep playing. I'd keep trying to win. If black tries to hold everything, king g8, his position is basically lost. Like after king g8, we would have bishop c6 and then rook c6, b5. And then when the pawn on a7 falls, we have 2 passed pawns on the outside. And that would essentially be the end of the game. So in conclusion, when I'm looking at these positions and I'm looking at this preparation that I have that goes all the way out to the endgame and still says that after everything is said and done, this position is probably slight edge white, even if the computer doesn't agree to me until I get to move 25. I see a position where if you play it properly and you force the exchange of dark squared bishops, kind of early, you end up with a situation where after, this queen d4 move with check, you end up with a situation where white has a very clear plan, but black has no real clear plan to unwind or develop his position, and this position seems to hold up even if queens come off the board, which is why I just sort of declare this position as slight edge white. And this is one of the reasons that I have a very good score with this. My preparation goes, really, you saw how deep my preparation goes out. It goes all the way out to move 25 and beyond, maybe even move 30, but it goes well into the end game. I just basically take my prep out until the engine agrees with what I'm saying. And if in the end I take it out that far and the engine still disagrees with me, I'll admit that I'm wrong. But I do feel that these positions are all slight edge white, and I do feel that all the way back in 1960, Paul Keres refuted the accelerated dragon. So there you go, internet. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.